Good evening, everyone. Welcome to St Christopher's Church. Welcome to Orsey Park. For those of you who don't know the area, well done, you found it. And you've probably established that this is not St Christopher's School, which is at the bottom of the hill. There's a very long reason why there's a very long story of why this is called St Christopher's Church, and it's not near the school, but I won't tell you that because it's not that interesting, and that's not why we're here. We're here for a book launch. If you don't realise that's what you've come for, then I do apologise, but hopefully you'll enjoy the evening anyway. We're here for the book launch of my book, which I don't actually have to hand. Have we got? There we go. So this is the book you've all come to join me in launching. It's called Loving the Enemy, Building Bridges in a Time of War. And hopefully you're here because you want to find out more about why it's called that and why I wrote it. And hopefully there's lots of copies of the book back there that you'll buy as well, which would be great. I'm not going to be leading through this evening on my own. I've got some help. John Whitcomb, the Dean of the Cathedral, is going to be comparing the first half of the evening. And we've got Richard Jeffcott and Richard Parker, who will be providing music for us for this evening as well. The first half is going to be made up of interview, some music, and there'll also be, hopefully, although we've been having a few technical difficulties, hopefully a video from Bishop of Coventry, Bishop Christopher Coxworth, who he wrote the foreword for this book. So it's great. He couldn't be with us tonight, but it's great that he is sort of with us in spirit, and hopefully you'll get to see that if the technology works. I actually think there's some people who are watching from home because we're live streaming, and I'm really pleased that I think I've got a friend in Romania who has already got a copy of the book, and actually I've sent a copy off to Canada as well, and there's my aunt in France is watching, and she's ordered a copy. So you could say I'm an international author already, which is not bad, not bad for day one. Without much further ado, I think I'm going to welcome John to say hi, and then we'll have some music from Richard.
Well, it seems strange to welcome you to a church which is not really my home church, but it's really nice to be part of this event. As you'll hear a little bit more later on, shared in a really memorable visit to Dresden with Andy back in 2015, which is when we first really got to know each other. It's my privilege now to lead the cathedral in the centre of Coventry, and of course our relationships between the cathedral in Coventry and many different places in Germany, but in particular Dresden, is really deep and significant as we share this common history of brokenness and seeking to respond creatively to that brokenness in ways that seek to rebuild not just churches and buildings, but relationships between different peoples, and so to sow the seeds of peace for a future generation. The story that we're meeting around this evening, I have had the privilege of reading over this last week or so. Do buy the book, buy it for your friends, buy them for Christmas. It's really good. Did I get the emphasis on that right? It's really good. It's a great read, and so it's a real pleasure to be part of introducing this event to you this evening. This event actually sits also as part of the Coventry Festival Friendship of Friendship. It's actually the third, it's officially the second, but in practice the third event of this programme today. Some of us gathered earlier on this afternoon in the cathedral at 2:00 for the official launch in this country or this city of the Phoenix collection of poetry, and Rainer and others are here who were part of that. So that was also a really inspiring event. And then at 4:30 for the official launch of an installation in the cathedral as part of our Broken Angel series. Some of you will know that one of the angels in the Great West Screen of Coventry Cathedral was broken by vandals or burglars, robbers, in January 2020, and we've sought to respond creatively to that by inviting a series of artists to put an installation into that pane. So that's what we were doing at 4:30. So those things, in a way, lead us to this creative and extraordinarily beautiful story. And the programme that's been put together for us this evening is going to take us, as it were, into the shared world that we are going to be exploring in the narrative that Andy will talk about a bit in his interview and then again in the second half. So I'm going to hand over to Richard. Is it going to be just you on the piano? And then we're also going to have some singing as well in a moment. So Richard, are you going to tell us what you're going to play?
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. My name's Richard. I'm the warm-up act. In a little while, my friend Richard and another Richard, Richard and I are going to do some singing during the evening. We hope we can illuminate this extremely powerful and moving story, and you'll see how that works if it does. We have had problems with the technology, but we'll press on. And so I thought I would just try and get us into the mood with two little piano pieces by Mendelssohn. And I've chosen Mendelssohn for three reasons, really. One is that we're going to hear a lot about Dresden. He knew Dresden well. A lot of his adult life he spent in Leipzig, which is not very far away, and he wrote music for Dresden and particularly for the Frauenkirche, so that's quite powerful. The other thing that we're going to hear a lot of tonight is about German-English, as it were, interaction. And Mendelssohn was quite good at that too. He came to England 10 times, and the last time he came to the first performance of Elijah, his marvellous oratorio Elijah, which was in Birmingham Town Hall, which isn't that far away. And the third reason is that Mendelssohn actually did, it's complicated, but he does seem to have suffered discrimination, and I think that's maybe a theme that we might get tonight as well. Mendelssohn, as you probably are aware, had a Jewish heritage, Jewish family, and even though his father converted to Christianity and even though Mendelssohn himself was baptized, it's very interesting that you only need to pick up the letters of Schumann, for instance, who is a direct contemporary, another musician, a colleague, and a friend, to realize that for Schumann, Mendelssohn was different and, if I may say so, inferior because he was Jewish. And we do feel that in a lot of, when we look at Mendelssohn's life. So I think his music is amazing, but has lots of resonance to other things that we'll be talking about during the course of the evening. Here are two short pieces for piano only. Richard will be doing some singing in a little while. The two short pieces, the first one is a song without words, which is a way of writing piano music that Mendelssohn kind of invented. And I think you'll probably know this one. We live in Tipton, and the ice cream van plays this, but Tipton is very posh, I should point out. But the second piece, I think you probably won't know. It actually is the third of a weird set. They're called Three Fantasies or Caprices, which is not very helpful. And although it's rather earlier in Mendelssohn's career, it has this extraordinary sense of kind of exploration. It doesn't sit still. It doesn't kind of really know what it's trying to achieve, really. And it's I think that's a bit of a metaphor, too. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Richard. That's brilliant to get us into the kind of mood. You can imagine yourself being in Dresden, sort of. When we went in 2015, we were really glad to be travelling with Bishop Christopher and one or two others. A chap called Justin was kicking around as well, but he was kind of taking second stage, really. But Christopher has obviously been very caught up with this project, and although he can't be here, he has sent us a message.
I'm standing in my study in Bishop's House in Coventry in front of some bookshelves that have a number of books that I've been building up over the years that I've been in Coventry about Germany, Germany's history, and especially Germany's relationship with the UK. They focus on histories of Germany, novels about Germany in the pre-war period, during the wartime experience, and then post-war. Here's a very fine study of the bombing of Dresden, 1945, towards the end of the war, February the 13th. And here's one of Dresden, was a very fine book, very thick book, about the post-war experience in the communist period, called the Tower. Here's one actually I haven't got around to reading yet, also tells of the wartime history of Dresden and the most awful bombing of the city that took place, as I said, on February the 13th. Andy March has added to these books about Germany, but he's added a book that is really very special, indeed unique. It tells the story of two people who got to know each other and overcame all the divisions that terrible period of European world history brought to humanity. There's another book here called Darkness Over Germany. It was written during the 1930s by a British academic who was just wanting to work out what was happening in Germany in the 1930s. And in many ways, Fred Clayton and his grandfather was like the author of this book. He was in Germany before the war and got to know it well. He goes on to tell the story of how Fred fell in love with Rike and his grandmother, and it traces that story, traces the story of these two countries who have been brought together again in a restored relationship, and tells a story of reconciliation. Its published title is Loving the Enemy, and that's a good title for the book, because that's really what the relationship between Coventry and Dresden over these now decades expresses a capacity initially of Christian people to reach out to those who had become the enemy and find a way of becoming friends, and saying together the prayer of Jesus that was taken to the heart of Coventry: Vater, forgive in German, Father, forgive. I've heard Andy pray that prayer in the Frauenkirche in Dresden, and also speak to hundreds of people in that church that was destroyed by British bombs and then rebuilt, not until the 21st century, after the end of the Cold War. And his book tells of this relationship between the two countries, how it's been restored through reconciliation. It encourages us to keep on walking that long road of reconciliation, not only between these two great countries of Britain and Germany, but using that as a confidence builder, that reconciliation between parties, two people, two communities, two nations who have fought each other, that reconciliation is possible, that it is truly possible to love the enemy and be reconciled and build together a better future. And it's a great joy for me that which Coventry embodies, especially in its relationship with Dresden, but many other German cities, is embodied in Andy's own history, his own family life. So I hope the launch goes well. I'm sorry I'm not able to be there today. I hope the book is well read and brings you joy as you read it. Well done, Andy. Thank you.
So thank you very much indeed, Bishop Christopher. Congratulations on getting the technology to work.
Yes, brilliant. Is this microphone loud enough? Can you all hear me? Cool, thank you. Great.
So we're going to have a bit of a conversation. Do you want to just kind of stand a little bit further forward? Because otherwise I'm going to have to keep turning round away from the microphone.
Or you can step further back.
Well, I could do.
There we go.
And that'll still work, will it?
Yeah, that'll still
So
work.
we're still good on the microphone?
I think so.
Okay.
Let's try it.
So, Andy, an incredible book. So your first degree was in creative writing, is that right?
Yeah, so English literature, creative writing. I was actually started university, 21 years ago.
Okay, so obviously, which is extraordinary because you're obviously still a teenager looking at you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. I'm not 40.
So was this actually the first piece of kind of writing of any sort of this kind of scale that you've done?
Yeah, certainly on this sort of scale. I've written bits and pieces, short stories, poetry, monologues and all that sort of stuff, but never embarked upon something like this before.
Okay.
So this is my first attempt at doing something that enormous.
Well, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean, it romps along. Am I right in thinking that actually very few other people here in the room have had a chance to read it yet?
Yeah, very few. One or two people have read it, which is great. Yes, at the back.
As part of the creative process.
But not many people have, so you hopefully you'll...
So there's a real narrative, there's an extraordinary story, and actually one would hope there's going to be a film here at some point.
Yeah.
Definitely. So maybe during the interval we could have some kind of like straw poll on who should play the lead characters. I think
that'd be good. That would be good. People say it should be made a movie.
Okay, I think it would, because the interest behind the characters is fascinating.
Yes.
But it was kind of quite, I mean, in a way, it was hard for me to work out exactly at what point you began to really grasp just how interesting these grandparents of yours had been. When did the story really kind of begin to? For me,
it began at my grandfather's funeral. So he died when I was 18, just before Christmas 1999, and he was. He for me, he had been quite a distant figure for one reason or another. He was quite old, much older than my grandmother, so he was harder to relate to than my grandmother, who I related to incredibly well, and we had a very close relationship always with me and my nanny, as I called her, and Grandpa was a bit more. I knew bits and pieces about him. I knew obviously that he'd been to Dresden. I knew some things, and then at his funeral, his brother delivered this extraordinary eulogy, which described a man who came to Cambridge as 1 year younger than everyone else because he'd got a scholarship, which he was from working class background, and he found himself at King's College, Cambridge in the 30s, which was a upper class environment with Etonians. So he was a fish out of water. And yet he won more prizes than I think even E.M. Forster, who was a couple of years before him. He aced everything. He was brilliant academically. He managed to kind of find his way through the social world as well. He was a contemporary of Alan Turing, who you will have heard of, and they were friends actually. And Alan Turing described my grandfather, and was quoted in the eulogy, which kind of blew me away, as the most learned man I ever met.
So if you're sitting there in the funeral and you're listening to all of this sort of stuff, and Barbara, this is your father, isn't it? Am I right? And so you, I guess, knew all of this, or was it a surprise to you as well? Sorry, it was a surprise to you as well. So all of this sort of extraordinary thing going on in the family, and you're sitting there.
I was blown
you were
away.
18 at the time.
Yeah, I was 18 at the time.
So you began to pick up this story. which we'll come back to later. But then you didn't really kind of press into it again for quite a few years.
Funny enough, although the first night me and my wife Liz met, I did tell her quite a lot about my grandfather, didn't I?
Oh, yeah, I saw that in the book. I thought, well, but obviously you must have been very charming in other respects. Yeah, well, I did wonder about that a little bit. Anyway,
yes,
actually, they look quite like it. Do they look quite like?
There is some family resemblance. Yeah.
Anyway,
so yes, but I left it there because I thought, well, this is interesting. I didn't think that I'd be the one to kind of tell this story, although I think quite a lot of us felt when he died, there was unfinished business with him and his story, and he wrote a lot of stuff that was just left in notebooks and stuff.
So what was the thing that kind of brought it back to the surface again for you?
Coming to Coventry, I discovered that Coventry and Dresden had this relationship, and I remember going to a clergy study day, and the Archbishop, David Porter, who worked for the Archbishop at the time and was part of the reconciliation team, he said, a group of us are going to Dresden to mark the 70th anniversary of the bombing of the city. And this was announced. And I was like, I need to go. I just had this innate sense of, here am I, a Coventry clergy person with a stake in the story, a personal stake in the story of this city, Dresden, which is my grandmother's hometown. In fact, generations before her were rooted in Dresden. So it was very much this sense of, actually, I need to be there. So I managed to get myself on the trip, and this is where we got to know each other, which was wonderful. It was a wonderful time.
So you turn up in Dresden with this kind of extraordinary, I mean, I was part of that as well, of course, also finding it slightly strange to be travelling with the Archbishop of Canterbury, who actually, some people in Coventry know quite well, because he was just like a curate and a vicar here, but now he's like the Archbishop of Canterbury, for goodness sake, and we're sort of pottering around the city with him.
It was very weird.
It was quite surreal, and I remember you being actually quite overwhelmed by it.
Yeah. So a week beforehand, I blogged about my story, and it then kind of was put on the diocesan webpage, and then I got a message from Graham Pringle, who works for the diocesan communications department, saying, the Church Times want to hear from you. So then the story was in the Church Times. And then he said, radio, then Deutsche Welle, this national German television channel, want to speak to you. So I was interviewed in the cathedral by Deutsche Welle. And then once I got to Dresden, it carried on. So they said, Deutsche Welle want to interview live outside the Frauenkirche. I was like, okay, this is strange. And Radio 5 Live want to be in touch. So I found myself, it was a very weird time. So I found myself on the actual anniversary itself, after I shared my story in German, which was a bit of a stretch, to the gathering at the Frauenkirche. Bishop Christopher was in, the 5th row. The Archbishop of Canterbury was in the 4th row. It was just, and 400 other people also were there. And I got back to the hotel room, and I was on the phone to the Stephen Nolan show. Just about an hour beforehand, the Archbishop had been shown a headline that was going to be in the Daily Mail the next day. He'd said in his speech, I have a real sense of profound sense of regret and sorrow for this bombing of Dresden. The Daily Mail headline that next morning was, Archbishop says sorry for bombing Nazis. I'll leave you to judge that yourself, but that's what the Daily Mail said. So I, with 4 minutes notice, the question I was by Stephen Nolan, who isn't kind of backwards and coming forwards, if you ever listen to him, was, should we say sorry for the bombing of Dresden? And I was given 4 minutes notice to think up an answer.
What did you say?
I said, I think so, yeah.
Yeah, good answer. Good answer. So let's just come back to the kind of impact on you of being in this place, which obviously is your roots in at least some of them.
Yeah.
So what was it like for you to walk into Dresden and to walk on those streets?
It was beautiful in some ways, because I had been once before with my grandmother.
Okay.
25 years beforehand, and it was lovely, but it didn't really mean much to me when I was 19. So in some ways, you kind of wished you could tell your younger self to take more notice of this. But it was lovely to kind of walk the streets of Dresden. It was very moving to go to Langerbrook, which is her home village, and go to the church and see the graveyard and see their old house as a family. But then I had this experience. In Dresden, they had this art installation called the Panometer, which is this big gas...
It's a former gasworks. Gasometer.
Yeah, that they've kind of created this panorama of the city. And most of the time it's Dresden during the Baroque era, and you can imagine it's got this lovely landscape of Dresden. But around the February time, it's changed to Dresden like the day after the bombing. So Dresden, desolate Dresden, and I just found myself walking and imagining my grandmother walking through the ruins of the city as she did weeks after the bombing, and thinking, wow, that was she experienced that.
So a hugely powerful experience.
Yeah, it's a visceral experience.
So that kind of crystallized your sense of connection with the story. You then, I'm going to leap ahead a little bit.
Yes.
So you came back. We have this wonderful opportunity of a 3-month break, sabbatical, working, obviously important study leave in the Diocese of Coventry. My lay colleagues at the cathedral feel quite strongly about this. So you had the opportunity to actually begin to properly research this story and set it down.
Yeah.
And that led us to the book that we've got today. Now, the book, when you get to read it, you'll discover that there's a kind of an immediacy to it, and there's lots of dialogue, and kind of, Fred was thinking this, and Rike was thinking that. Did you make it up?
Some bits. So one thing I had as my source material was this, which is quite a rare copy. It's called The Cloven Pine. It is the novel my grandfather wrote in 1942, which was to share his experience of having been in Dresden in 1936, which was how he kind of met the family. And he wrote a semi-autobiographical novel, which was published, and then the publisher was bombed to shreds, and there aren't many copies left because of that. But so because it was semi-autobiographical, and because I kind of felt like I know him enough, actually I could work out which bits of the dialogue in here felt authentic. And so I was thinking, okay, the bits in Dresden, actually, I think I took portions of and adapted some of it, but I took dialogue and stuff, exchanges from this, because I thought, actually, I think these exchanges really happened. I think these arguments that he would have had happened, and so I used some dramatic license for that. And then also, I've got notebooks of his where he expresses and describes some of his thoughts and feelings, and fills them in. So I know what he's thinking at the time. And also then I've got this, this is my grandmother's journal that she wrote, some of her experiences during 1945, all in German. So I am so grateful for Richard, this man here, who translated not only this, but all the letters between my grandparents, which were all in German.
Okay, how many letters? I mean, there are lots of letters in the book, and I'm assuming that the letters aren't all in the book. So how many letters were there? I mean, incredible that they kept them all.
1940.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
So I, in my naivety, thought I might be able to try and translate them myself. It took me about 3 hours to translate one, and I thought, okay, if I try and replicate this, all I'll be doing would be translating letters. So Richard came along, and he was an absolute godsend.
So you've got this incredible kind of wealth of source material.
Yeah. But what I realised was it would be some bits of it were full of dialogue and stuff, and because I knew, and other bits wouldn't. I thought, well, there's got to be an evenness towards it. So there's certain things, and I'm going to read out an excerpt later where in my grandfather's obituary, in the tribute. There was one line which I found fascinating, which was, on one occasion, my grandfather, Fred, gave Guy Burgess, who some of you might have heard of, short shrift. And I was thinking, they must have had an argument. And so I guessed what the contents of that argument would be, based on also what I know my grandfather thought of Burgess and others. So that was... So that's one of the
examples. So you kind of pictured this encounter in a pub, basically, with Turing and Guy Burgess.
And I'm grateful for this guy Rowan Somerville, who sort of helped me shaped the text and suggested areas where I could bring these scenes to life more.
So it's really, it's really powerful. But it's also it has quite a contemporary feel. So one of the things that I'm guessing you might, I don't know how much you drew from Fred's own journals. You've spent quite a bit of time with him exploring his own sexual identity.
Yeah.
So where was that theme drawn from?
Well, it was that was partly through the biography of Alan Turing.
Yeah.
So Alan Turing was homosexual himself, and my grandfather, because they were friends, I know that they had conversations because they recorded in Alan Turing's biography. So this was part of the thing that kind of drew them, is that Alan was very open in that area. And my grandfather, I think, could best be described as confused in that area, and just not having a clue, just finding these troubled waters, and finding Alan's own confidence and in that area slightly beguiling, and so it was just definitely an issue that he wrestled with. And
so it takes you really into a sense of quite a deep sense of connection with this man, and so I think both Fred and Rike come through quite powerfully in the book. Actually, I mean, incredibly interesting people, which I think is one of the reasons why you read it and you think there's a lot of event and there's a lot of interest and depth, which I guess is one of the reasons why you think that it might be a film. So we're going to need to wrap this bit up in a moment, because otherwise people will not get to their drunk glass of wine during the interval. But were there any kind of real surprises as you came through? I mean, things that you went back and go, oh my gosh, I've just discovered this is so extraordinary.
I think the whole of the experience, my grandfather did code breaking in India, and so we discovered some of the reasons, his experiences in India, which again were complete blank to me. I'd kind of vaguely knew he'd done code breaking, but I had no idea of why he'd been sent there in India and all that sort of stuff. So that was brought to life, his wartime experience. But also, I don't think my nanny never really talked about her wartime experience at all. So it was all new.
Wow.
It was all new.
And what impact, lastly, has it had on you to do this? I mean, how has it changed you maybe as a person? How has it changed you in your sense of relating to this wider story between Britain and Germany and Coventry and Dresden?
That's a big question.
It's a big question, actually.
Yeah. I think there's a sense of deeper...
Bad interview technique.
deeper compassion.
Yeah.
I think, a greater understanding of certainly the brokenness that both my grandparents experienced and suffered from, and a kind of a greater understanding certainly of my grandfather, and it kind of makes, I think that sense of compassion for him, and very much a desire. I remember standing in the Frauenkirche, having just been welcomed so beautifully by the people of Dresden when I was there back in 2015, and just saying, I feel like I'm a Dresdener. You know, I feel that rooted of very much, I'm not just British. I am not just English. I am British, English, German as well, and that actually part of my identity being really, really important and continuing to be so for me.
I think that's amazing, and it was a privilege to be part of seeing you kind of on the earliest steps of that journey when I was there in Germany with Andy. And it took you a long time to wind down after it, I think, didn't it? Because you kind of got higher and higher as you were in Germany and all these different interviews and things. But thank you so much for sharing some of that with us.
Yeah, thank you.
We're going to have some music, 4 short songs to lead us into an interval. There's going to be ample opportunity to purchase this book during this evening.
Of course.
So I've no idea what mechanisms have been devised here to take money off you.
So
but
there's
I'm sure
cash
there are
and card you
many
can do.
variable. So cash and card. So as you're listening to the songs, just be thinking about how many books you are going to be able to buy.
For your friends, neighbours, cousins.
But believe me, actually, as a Dean of a Cathedral, you get asked to read quite a lot of stuff. This is really good. I'm not going to say anything about all the other things. This is a really good read. You won't regret buying it for yourself and for others. that are close to you. So Richard's going to sing to us. Richard, are you going to tell us what you're going to sing? 4 short songs.
Thank you.
Can you hear me all right? Yes.
Yep.
Okay, good. I just first of all like to say that I'm also... Thank you. Okay, how's that? You good? Yes? Can we hear? Yeah, magic. Wonderful. Good. I just wanted to say before I start that I also was on that visit to Dresden in 2015 for the 70th anniversary. It was an amazing experience. We met some wonderful people. There was a group of about 12 of us from the Friends of the Cathedral. We were treated like royalty. It was like a real special event. And it was indeed a special event. It was the only time that I have shared a space with the federal president. It was extraordinary. And I'd just like to mention, at risk of embarrassing him, a good friend of mine from Dresden over there called Rainer Bartschaitis, whom I met at that time. He was also involved in the production of Anthony Owen's poetry book, which we heard about this afternoon. Okay, what we're going to do to wrap up this half is I'm going to sing you 4 shortish songs by Schubert, one of the greatest German composers. He was obviously very well known in Dresden. These are all songs to do with autumn. And being Schubert, they mix a kind of pleasure with a slight kind of regret. So he's quite pleased at first at the beginning of autumn because the leaves are changing and the fruit is harvesting and he's looking forward to the wine and so on. Later on, it becomes a little bit more melancholy because that's what he is. Such an enormously great composer. So I hope you enjoy it.
So I hope you've really enjoyed that first half of this evening. Refreshments are going to be brought to your tables, I'm told, which sounds absolutely lovely. So there's no need to get up and mill around, and that will make this whole part of the evening move quite quickly. Andy, where are the book signings going to be? Okay, so if you want to buy books to get them signed, then that's just towards the where you came in. But the refreshments are going to come round to you, so enjoy. We're going to try and start as on time as possible, which is 8:25 for the beginning of the second half. Yeah. the material that he's been writing, interspersed with some more music as well. So this is going to be a really lovely, kind of quite chilled vibe for the scene. We could do with candles, really, couldn't we, as we kind of just develop that club atmosphere. So, Andy, have you had a chance for any refreshment yourself at all? You've got a glass of wine. Excellent, good. Well, let's hope that the wine doesn't go to your head too much. So, Andy, we're in your hands for the first reading. Let's welcome Andy back to the stage, shall we?
So we're going to, I'm going to be joined in to have a different voice. Richard will be reading out some of the sort of linking bits between the passages. Here's your... Oh, you've got a copy. Oh, well, take it off. So Richard will be popping up to kind of add a bit of linking between the passages. I discovered when I was thinking, it'd be nice to have some bits of readings from this book, actually trying to distill 90,000 words into an evening. It's quite a lot. When I preach, because I'm a vicar kind of for my day job, I kind of work at something like, it's 2,000 words is about 20 minutes sermon. So 100 words a minute. So I thought, well, if I read it all out to you, we might be here for some time. So thankfully, you'll be relieved to know that I'm not going to do that. But I want to begin by saying how much it means to me that you're here and to support me. And for this part of the evening, we're going to be, I'll be reading passages of the book, and it's going to be interspersed by music provided by Richard and Richard that will hopefully evoke some of the time and the mood that we experience in the book. So let's begin. You can start this. You'll need to.
Yeah. Thank you very much. On. Here we are. Right, here we go. So let's begin by going back to Cambridge in the 1930s, where Fred Clayton is about to begin a new life, having won a scholarship to King's College. Fred comes from a working class background in Liverpool, and finds himself in the rarefied halls of Cambridge at a time of political turmoil. Owing to his background and his being different from his contemporaries, many of whom came from Eton, he finds he is treated as a bit of a novelty. Here, he has some very interesting encounters and makes some good friends, including with one Alan Turing.
One evening in November 1933, Fred was having drinks with his new friend and fellow Kingsman, Alan Turing, in the junior common room of Trinity College. Fred had first got acquainted with Turing through rowing. Though he wasn't sporty, his slight size did give him certain advantages, and he became cox for Turing's boat. Fred was with Turing one evening in the common room bar when they were approached by a man with movie star good looks, wearing a striped suit jacket, spotted tie and cream trousers, ostentatious even for Cambridge. He nodded to Alan and focused his attention on Fred. "Hello, I don't believe we've met. Can I get you a drink? I'm having a gin fizz. Would you like the same?" "Oh, thank you. No, half a mild, thank you." "Right you are." The man sauntered towards the bar. "You've caught someone's eye," Alan muttered. "Believe me, I can tell." "What do you mean?" Fred protested. "Oh, stop it, Alan." Turing raised his eyebrow, but before the conversation could continue, the man returned to the table. "Mind if I join you?" and sat down without waiting for an answer. "So, you're clearly not from around here." "No, I'm from Liverpool." "Liverpool? How interesting. I've heard things are terrible up there. Thousands of people unemployed. It just goes to show that the capitalist system is utterly bankrupt. I'm sick of it, and so are a lot of us. I suppose that's what brought me into the party. They're a great bunch. There's a demonstration happening at the weekend for the Armistice Day celebrations by the War Memorial. Why don't you join us? I've heard you'll be there, Turing, won't you?" Turing nodded. I'm not sure what my plans are yet," Fred replied. "Oh, right," the man responded, seemingly affronted. "Anyway, I must be going." He proffered his hand. Nice to meet you. Fred Clayton. I'm Burgess. Guy Burgess. I'm sure we'll meet again. Fred felt perplexed by this encounter. At first he was flattered by the interest shown in him, but he wasn't sure what it was about him that had piqued Burgess' interest. Over time, though, he came to realize that because of his modest origins, it was assumed that he would be naturally sympathetic to the burgeoning communist movement. But it wasn't quite that simple for Fred. Things never were. He found it galling that upper-class public schoolboys, old Etonians like Burgess, were trading on their style and charm and sounding off about the working class, whilst knowing very little. They pressed Fred very hard in their attempts to convert him, but he distrusted their dogmatism, the extension of Marxism to all the spheres of life, and sometimes their remarks seemed plain daft. He couldn't get over his suspicion that he was a target, so that he could become the token working class member of the Communist Party. And he also didn't like their tactics. He didn't like being encircled. Another day, Fred was sitting with Turing on the Bodley Court lawn. They were sitting together, and they heard the familiar clipped voice. Turing? Clayton? Together again? Thought I'd find you here. Without waiting for an invitation, Burgess sat down and continued. You know, Clayton, of all the people here, you really should join the British Communist Party. We understand the sufferings, the oppressed working classes. I'm surprised at you, really, coming from where you do. Fred and Turing exchanged exasperated looks. Fred had lost count of the number of times Burgess, Blunt, and their associates had attempted to recruit him. Until this point, he had joined in their discussions, good-humouredly battered their attempts away. But after Burgess ignored his polite refusals a second time, something snapped. Fred stood up. Look, Burgess, I know you'd like me to be your poster boy, and you go on as though you really know what it's like for us poor, backward people in the depressed North. You pontificate about the working classes and lecture me on their sufferings, but you don't have a bloody clue what you're on about. I doubt you even know anyone in the working class. And no, I don't really count, do I? You think that communism is the sole safeguard of peace on earth, but refuse to look at the atrocities that are being done to opponents of Stalin and his cronies in Russia. The only peace for those who don't toe the line there is in the grave. Quite frankly, I've had it up to here. I won't be joining you now or never. Fred glanced over at Turing, who could barely suppress the grin on his face. I'll see you later, Alan. I'm going back to my room. He swept off, leaving Burgess with a stupefied expression on his face, for once, speechless.
So, that was life at Cambridge for Fred. A heady time that opened up an insatiable appetite for discovery. A natural linguist, he next turned his attention to German, travelling to Vienna during a break in studies. While he's there, he reads Mein Kampf. Another obsession, a deep and growing hatred of Hitler, is born.
So this is 1934 now. The question that kept niggling at Fred was, could the German population really believe this Nazi doctrine preached by Hitler and his cronies with such violence? There was only one way to find out. By experiencing it firsthand, he wanted to go to Germany to find out what it was happening, what the Nazi system was really like. As well as the search for truth, he was also attracted by the idea of making human contact in spite of everything, to somehow build bridges. Perhaps it was the optimism and idealism of youth, but he thought he could make a difference. So in 1936, he travelled.
So, he decides to take a year's break from his studies to spend a year in Dresden, teaching at the renowned Kreuzschule, the School of the Holy Cross. We have a little interlude now, which is a musical interlude from Richard and myself. We're going to sing two very short songs by Richard Strauss. Strauss was extremely well known in Dresden at this time. In fact, most of his operas were premiered there, and certainly in the 30s, he had 3 premieres, one after another. So he was very well known. He was also known for his songwriting, an amazing song composer, particularly love songs for his wife Pauline. And what we'd like to do is sing you 2 very short love songs which give you an idea of what Strauss is like. The first one, over here. Yes. The first one is called Du meines Herzens Krönelein. You are the crown of my heart. You are pure gold. You bring pleasure to everybody you meet. Well, the second song is called Heimkehr, coming home. The boat speeds towards the bank. The dove returns to her nest, and my heart returns home to you.
At last, the train was nearing Dresden, his destination, and the place where Fred would call home for the next year. He craned his neck to catch his first glimpse of the silhouettes of the old town on the southern bank of the Elbe River. Fred gasped at the beauty that had earned Dresden the title of the Florence of the Elbe. He had spent happy hours poring over photographs of the old city in the library in Cambridge, but the reality before him, even glimpsed from the train, was better than he had imagined.
Fred soon settles in and faces his first day at the famed Kreuzschule, the School of the Holy Cross, where he will teach for the year. Fred's first class is with the formidable Herr Klinger, with the 15 and 16-year-olds. Lessons with Herr Klinger proved to be very interesting indeed.
In their second lesson, Klinger deliberately took Fred by surprise by delivering the whole class over to the Englishman. Talk to them in English. Talk to them about English public schools. They will understand. Fred was rather taken aback by this. Klinger clearly believed in the success of his own teaching. Fred was more than a little embarrassed. He could feel he was blushing, but there was nothing he could do. Soon he was stumbling, mumbling, hesitating, speaking almost apologetically as he tried to say something coherent and useful to the class, while wondering how much they really understood. He could see by the blank faces that the majority understood very little. But he had noticed a particular boy whose blue eyes were accentuated by the sky blue pullover he was wearing. He wore black corduroy shorts and no tie. There was nothing very uniform about any of the lads' attire in the school. He was regarding Fred with an amused smile. They exchanged glances, conveying their shared appreciation of the absurdity of the situation. "We both know," the glance said, "that you probably don't understand what I'm saying. But it's okay. I wouldn't worry about it. It's the most awful rubbish anyway. It's absurd, isn't it?" The joke was on Klinger, who clearly wasn't as good at teaching English as he thought he was.
Fred ends up making a connection with that boy in the blue pullover, and they talk after the class. It turns out that this boy, Götz, struggles with school. Fred offers to help him out and is invited to visit his family and become a tutor for him and his younger brother, Wolf. He forms a friendship, particularly with the younger brother, Wolf, and their father, Werner. But with Götz, the relationship is more complicated.
In Götz, Fred saw a young man who was struggling with the burden of parental expectation under which he labored, struggling with the tumult of the world around him, the politics at home and at school, and in the streets. Fred couldn't help but admire the way he was trying to brave the gathering storm. Götz and his contemporaries had no real power over their future. All power, it seemed, was in the hands of the state. Could Götz really afford to rebel, even if he intended to? Towards the end of their first term, Fred's first term, he bumped into Götz. Going home, Fred asked, "Do you mind if I walk with you?" "Not at all." As they were talking on the street corner, a group of boys from the school passed them. 2 were from Götz's class. "Heil Hitler!" they cried, with a mixture of friendliness and mockery. More friendliness, perhaps, in each, more mockery in the mass. Fred flushed, frowned, smiled, gave a perfunctory greeting in reply. "You don't like doing that," said Götz sharply. "What?" "The German greeting." "What, in Rome one does as Rome does. But it goes against the grain. It becomes a habit." "But you don't like it," Götz persisted. Fred frowned. "Why do you want me to admit that?" "Oh, I don't know," began Götz, but then it all came pouring out. "You can't be expected to understand it all. You think of the poor Jews and the poor communists and the terrible camps. Don't look at me like that. I hear what my parents say. I know about Dachau. It's near where my grandparents live. That's where the political prisoners get sent. I'm not as ignorant as I look, you know. Why did you come here if you're so anti-German?" I'm not, Fred protested. I may be anti-Hitler. It's the same thing and you know it. What do you want? Why don't you leave me alone? Why can't you go and find some other victim of your propaganda campaign? What's the matter? Fred asked, taken aback. Has something happened? No, Gert shook his head. It's no good. Look, I've got to go now. He turned and almost ran away. Fred felt numb. So much for building bridges.
6 months later, at the end of his time in Dresden, Fred takes time to reflect.
Above all, Fred had found that he'd got emotionally involved with the people he'd met in Dresden. It was made worse, almost like a fever at times, by the feeling that the pupils in the Kreuzschule were trapped by a regime which they had been too young to choose. He feared that war between their two nations was inevitable. This generation of innocent young men would be amongst the many victims of such a conflict. He'd come to Dresden with vague ideas of bridge building. Perhaps some bridges had been built. Whether they would stand the test of time was another question.
So, Fred returns home to England, increasingly troubled and feeling utterly helpless as the nation sleepwalks towards war with Germany. When war breaks out, Fred makes the decision to write a book.
This book would remind people that Germans were humans, to be loved and pitied and not guilty because they were German. He resolved that this book must be done before he and his countrymen began to hate too much. Whilst it was still possible to think of in terms of individuals, it would be, in the midst of war and hate, a declaration of pity and love for the trapped youth of Dresden. Perhaps there was room for this novel. Perhaps someone would dare to publish it. How would it be received? Was the country at war with the people he depicted as lovable creatures, ready to read such a potentially controversial book that would offend their patriotic values?
Fred's book, The Cloven Pine, is published, but not before he is sent to India as a codebreaker. He will be there for over 3 years. Now follows our second interlude, which will be 2 traditional English songs which we know Fred liked and loved. The first one is Drink to Me Only, With Thine Eyes. You know this one probably. The second song is Tom Bowling. And if you don't know the title, you'll almost certainly recognize the tune if you've ever listened to The Last Night of the Proms, because it's one of the collection of sea songs that is always performed there. In fact, it's the cello solo without words. But tonight you've got the words as well.
Kiss, but
After the end of the war, Fred writes to the Büttner-Wobst family, this is Götz and Wolf, and others, in an attempt to pick up the threads of the life that seemed to have completely unraveled. What's happened to that family who had shown him so much friendship?
Friederike Luisa Büttner-Wobst was the youngest of 5 children, a surprise addition to the family. The family rumour was that Dora, their mother, had had her head turned by a younger doctor, a younger colleague of Werner, their doctor father. A fresh passion had ensued between the doctor and his wife, made hotter by jealousy, and Rike was the result. Rike was almost determinedly happy. She loved to laugh. She loved to run and play. The Dresdner Heide was her playground, and she felt so liberated when she was deemed old enough to go out on her own to explore the forest. It was even better when she could persuade her older siblings to play with her, and she was grateful that Wolf, who shared her sense of humour and appetite for mischief, would join her in playing games of chase or hide and seek. Of course, she missed Götz when he went away to join the Labour Service in April 1938. He wrote many letters home, and Rike enjoyed gathering round with the rest of the family as Dora read out his updates. Rike was slightly jealous of Götz's life. It seemed so exciting. He was able to see the world, and he was posted to Prague after Czechoslovakia was incorporated into the Greater German Reich in March 1939. From there, he wrote letters and cards telling of tourist explorations, theatre visits, and contacts with the Czech population. It was such an adventure. What fun her big brother was having. Of course, war changed all of that. War had changed almost everything. Now it was 1946. She was an adult, and those pre-war days seemed far, far away. One day, out of the blue, a letter came from Fred Clayton. The name sounded familiar, but she couldn't quite place it at first. Then she remembered he was the English teacher who had stayed in Dresden for a year in 1936, a decade beforehand. Years before, Fred had expressed his hope that he and her family would remain friends, even if their countries were at war. And now, 7 years on, he was clearly hoping to rekindle their friendship. Do you want to read the letter?
Okay. Dear Götz, I know it has been a long time since I last wrote to you. Over the past 7 years since war broke out, I have thought of you and your family often. I deeply regret the enmity that sprang up between our nations. I have never thought of you all without a deep sense of love and friendship. I was always very grateful for the kindness you all showed me during my time in Dresden, which seems such a long time ago now. I am writing simply to ask how you have fared in these difficult times. I spent most of the war years in India as part of the Allied forces fighting against the Japanese. These were difficult times, but I'm sure that is no different from many other people. I was horrified when I heard about the bombing of Dresden and thought about you all and your well-being. Please write whenever you can. I am anxious to know how you all are. With kindest greetings, Fred Clayton.
Rike began to write her response on behalf of the family that evening. Where to begin? So much had happened since those pre-war days of peace. There was so much to tell.
When Rike replies to Fred, a correspondence begins between them, as well as between Fred and Rike's brother, Wolf.
Fred was grateful for the warmth of restored contact with Wolf and the others. He found these comforting. They made him feel that he had, after all, built a few slender bridges, which survived. And a new one was being built with Rike. Was there a way he could help her? He was, after all, well aware of the situation in the Russian zone. It was clear that the ongoing difficulties of the political situation in Germany were likely to persist. As a single woman, Rike was more vulnerable than her sisters, and Fred felt a responsibility to her somehow. So, with this in mind, he wrote to her with a suggestion that she might come to England, where he might help her find work.
There is talk here that perhaps German girls will be able to come to England for certain types of jobs. But for the moment, it is all very vague. I just wanted to say that I might be able to get you a reasonably pleasant position here.
He was fretful about how this must have sounded. Was it being too patriarchal or even controlling? He didn't even know the woman, and here he was offering to help her. Fred needn't have been concerned. Rike was grateful for his interest in her and for the way he sought to help. She replied warmly from the state farm where she had worked during the war, visiting old friends.
Dear Mr. Clayton, if only you knew how much pleasure your 2 letters gave me. I found your suggestion about coming to England to work really interesting. I'd be delighted to come, because I really believe I would be well looked after under your protection. Of course, a secure job would be the first step towards such a move.
As their friendship evolved, plans for Rike to come to England under Fred's protection became more concrete. At first, in the early stages of their correspondence, Fred saw himself as the strong protector of a lonely child, motivated by his regard for the Butner-Vobs family. But he began to realize that she was so much more. Each letter simply added to the impression that was forming in his mind of a powerful, resilient, fearless, down-to-earth, and funny young woman. She confounded his expectations. She was like no one he had ever come across before. And he discovered that he was almost desperate to get to know her more. He prized her letters, reading them so many times that he could recite parts word for word. Although he had not heard her speak as an adult, he imagined a way that she might read these letters aloud to him. He began to rely on them to lift his spirits, to quieten the anxiety that still followed him like his shadow. And it worked. Something about her presence, conveyed through her words on those pieces of paper, brought him peace. If she could do that through her words, he dared to think, then how much more would this be true if she were there in person? What if she came to England as his equal, not for work, but for life, for love? It was all so unfamiliar, but also frightening. Although it seemed barely credible to him, he wondered, could she be much more than a pen friend, more than Wolf's sister? Could she be so much more?
Well, you'll just have to read the book to find out. There you go. I'd just like to wrap up this evening. We have another little musical interlude for you, if you can bear it. What we wanted to sing was a song that we know Fred and Rike both liked. They loved Gilbert and Sullivan. In particular, the Mikado. So I'm going to sing you a song from the Mikado. And to finish, to kind of turn the circle right back, we'll sing another song by Schubert, a very famous song, one of his latest songs, called Serenade, Ständchen. Beautiful song. I hope you enjoy.
On a tree by a river, little Tom Tit sang willow, tit, willow. And I said to him, Dicky bird, why do you sit singing willow, tit, willow? Is it weakness of intellect, birdie, I cried, or a rather tough worm in your little inside? With a shake of his poor little head, he replied, oh, willow, tit, willow. He slapped at his chest as he sat on that bough, singing willow, tit, willow. And a cold perspiration bespangled his brow. Oh, willow, tit, willow. He sobbed and he sighed, and a he plunged himself into the billowing wave, and an echo arose from the suicide's grave. Oh, willow, tit willow, tit willow. Now I feel just as sure as I'm sure that my name isn't Willow, tit willow, tit willow, that 'twas blighted affection that made him exclaim, Willow, tit willow, tit willow. And if you remain obdurate, I shall perish as he did, and you will know why, though I probably shall not exclaim as I die. Oh, willow, tit willow, tit willow. Now for a slightly different tone. Attention, serenade. The lover is outside his beloved's house. You can hear him playing the guitar in the piano part. And he's beseeching, imploring her to come down into the grove to speak to him. Because there is no danger. Leise fliehen meine Lieder durch die Nacht zu dir. In den stillen Hain hernieder, Liebchen, komm zu mir. Flüsternd schlanke Wipfel rauschen in des Mondes Licht, in des Mondes Licht, des Verräters feindlich Rauschen fürchte heute nicht, fürchte heute nicht. Hörst die Nachtigallen schlagen, ach, sie flehen dich. Mit der Töne süßen Klagen flehen sie für mich. Sie verstehen des Busen Sehnen, kennen Liebesschmerz, kennen Liebesschmerz. Rühren mit den Silbertönen jedes weiche Herz, jedes weiche Herz. Lass auf dir die Brust bewegen, Liebchen, höre mich, bebend hau ich dir entgegen. Komm, beglücke mich,
Thank you so much to our two Richards for just exquisite music to punctuate this evening. What an extraordinary evening. Andy, congratulations.
Thank you.
I mean...
I didn't know what a book launch was, so I thought,
Absolutely.
this is it.
Yeah, well, I've been to a number of book launches over the years, and this is definitely the best by quite a long way.
Thank you very much.
So well done.
And it means so much that you're here. Some of you I know very well. It means a lot to be here at St. Christopher's Church, my church family. I love you very much. I've been vicar here for 9 years. This is home. And it means a lot to be able to... this story was birthed out of my time of being vicar here, out of my sabbatical that I had away from this place. So actually the congregation has sacrificed a lot, even if they haven't necessarily chosen to, so this book can be born. And I love the fact that I've been able to have it here, and that so many of you from my church family are here today and this evening, and that means a lot. So thank you to you. Thank you particularly to Irene. Where is Irene? Hello, Irene.
I'm thinking Irene might have something to do with the food.
Irene, I've just got these for you. Can you come up? She has laid on all this stuff for you this evening with some helpers as well. And Irene, it means so much that you've done this. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it.
Should we be doing that?
Bit
Sorry.
COVID risky there.
There we go. Just for a second.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And it's been great. Thank you, John, for helping me host. It's lovely. And one thing John didn't tell you was when we were in Dresden the first time, I found myself in a bit of a predicament because we arrived and we were going literally from the airport straight to a number of events. And so there was a very short window to kind of get in from the airport, get freshened up, and then go on to the next event. In my wisdom and in the hope, in the desire to save money for myself, I'd chosen accommodation which was about 2 miles away from the city centre. So, John, basically I lodged in your room for the evening, and so I was very grateful for that. He had a very nice room, and so I was very grateful to be able to share that space just for the early evening. Before I traipsed to my own place, which I then I moved hotel the next evening. So thank you, John, for that particular hospitality that you.
My pleasure. It's been absolutely lovely to share with you this evening, Andy, and what a privilege, really. I'm sure we're probably about to wrap up, but just to say, it is, of course, as I said, the best book launch I've ever been to. A book launch is marked in its success by the number of sales that have been
done
made.
quite well so far.
So, yes, excellent. Have we got any books left at all?
There are some books left there, and yeah, so, okay, please do buy, if you haven't already bought one, please buy a copy, but also really importantly, I've given you, there's a free bookmark in each of the books. If you can go on to the links that are there and review the book. So it's on Goodreads and Amazon particularly, because they're the kind of main sales places. If you can review the book, obviously give it 5 stars. Obviously, don't review the book if you think it's rubbish. If you think it's good, review the book, give it 5 stars, and then it'll make other people want to read it. And that's the crucial thing. And we'll see what happens with it. You know, this is in some sense, yes, it is my story, but it's not. I'm the steward of it. And so, for the sake of my grandparents, who were extraordinary people, you know, buy the book and spread the word about them and their courage. That would mean a lot to me. It was lovely having Richard here and Richard, both Richards, and just as a very small token of appreciation, I've just got a thank you to you both.
Very good. Thank you.
And then This has been a family project. Liz, you've read it. My wife Liz has read through it, and my aunt, who's hopefully still watching the live stream, hi. She's read it through, and my dad has read it. How many times are you on about the fourth time now? Reading through about the fourth time. He says it's good. So that's good.
I think they deserve several.
But I think particularly, I wanted to say thank you to my mum. Oh. Come up, mum. This has been a labour of love for her, and it has been a labour of love for us both. And it's been lovely to share in with this together over the 7 years since I went to Dresden. Shared the story. I was full of it, and you came up for the half term. I told you all about it, and then raided your attic, and since then it's been very much our project that we've done together over this time, and it's been a real joy. So thank you.
And I just want to say that it's, for me, it's been a huge privilege. I couldn't have done it. I had the boxes in the attic, but I wouldn't have been able to do it, and it's a real labour of love, and it's a great legacy for our family. And to piece together what was quite a complex story from numerous sources was a real labour of love from Andrew. And we are, as a couple and as a family, hugely grateful for that legacy, and that these books, whether they sell more widely or not, will be something that our family will treasure forever. And so we are hugely grateful.
Thank you.
And we have a few people who are from Dresden here. The news for you is that Rainer, who has already been mentioned over there, Rainer is working on a translation in German. And so the hope is that there will be, the people of Dresden will be able to read it as much as the people in England. And so this will be a truly international story, and it's just right that that's the case, because it is, that's my heritage. I'm not just English and German, I'm both. So that's the goal, is to have, and it's only thanks to Rainer that it will happen at all. So look out, watch this space, and and also look out for it on Netflix or something, because that might happen as well. You never know. You never know.
There are a variety of people here tonight, obviously from many different walks of life. Some people of faith, some people not of faith. But as this building is a church that we've been gathering this evening, and I'd love us just to finish by dedicating this story and all that it means to God, and to pray for God's work of peace and reconciliation to go forward. So I'll just invite you just to bow your heads for a moment, if you would, as we finish. Loving God, we thank you for the story of Fred and Rike, for their friends, for their family, for those that lived long, for those that lived a much shorter time. Thank you for those that have come after them. And we pray now that you would give life to this story of the blossoming of love between those from countries that were at war with each other, and that you would use it to inspire others to work for your peace and reconciliation in the world today. And we ask this in the name of your Son, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen.
Bless you all. Have a great evening.
Thank you. That's a wrap.
All right. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Well done.